The message on my smartphone took me by surprise. My lover is pregnant, so we're getting a divorce. Review the court papers and respond ASAP. Pack your things and leave quickly. I stared at the screen, stunned. He'd been having an affair, and now this. The news of a pregnancy. I tried calling him repeatedly, but he never answered. All I could manage was a simple yes. A month later, after moving out and without saying anything further, I began receiving persistent calls from my ex-husband, whom I had not spoken to since. Despite having nothing left to discuss, I felt compelled to respond. When I finally did, he erupted into rage, screaming at me. Meanwhile, my life with my husband Mark and my mother-in-law had been surprisingly smooth. I had always thought mother-in-law issues were a fictional trope, but I came to appreciate just how wonderful mine was. I heard my coworkers complain about their in-laws and realized how fortunate I was. I made an effort to treat her with more respect and care. When my mother-in-law fell ill and was hospitalized, I started working from home to care for her. Initially, Mark was supposed to be the primary caregiver, but it fell to me. She would smile apologetically in the hospital, saying, "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for being a burden. I wish she could be happy instead." I truly loved her. We'd shared close moments over tea, movies, and shopping. She often joked about my husband, saying he lacked compassion, though it was clear she said it with a hint of loneliness. "He just lies around when he comes home from work," she'd say. "I'll give him a lecture when I get out." Unfortunately, she never had the chance and passed away. After the funeral, I found myself alone at home, reminiscing about her. Her portrait showed her smiling peacefully, but her absence left a void in my heart. My husband hadn't returned home since the funeral, and he hadn't even visited his mother in her final days. There was nothing left to discuss with him, but I felt a deep sadness for my mother-in-law who had left this world without seeing her son one last time. Determined to confront Mark, I tried to locate him. He barely responded to emails and hung up when I called. It wasn't just about reminiscing. There were many unresolved issues between us that needed to be addressed. My voice echoed in the empty house as I waited for him to return. My phone vibrated with a new email notification. It was from Mark. I opened the email, half expecting the same message. "My mistress is pregnant, so I want a divorce. Review the court papers and respond ASAP. Pack your things and leave quickly." I read the message in disbelief. Was this the same woman he was having an affair with? "I can't believe it. She's pregnant." The message on my smartphone left me stunned. I repeatedly tried to reach Nick, but no matter how many times I called, he didn't answer. When the call connected, I only got a recorded message. After 20 years of marriage, was it really ending like this with just one email? As I listened to the dial tone, tears began to overflow. I couldn't hold back my sobs any longer and gave up on the call, throwing my smartphone aside in despair. This was happening too soon after my mother-in-law's death. I hadn't even had the chance to mourn her properly. I tried contacting Nick repeatedly after that, but he never responded. Not to my calls, not to my emails. It seemed our relationship was truly over. We never had any significant conversations about what was happening. I had simply replied yes to his email and left the house. A month has passed since the divorce was finalized. I've rented a room in a single-story house and am experiencing living alone for the first time in 20 years. I'm still working remotely, a necessity I took up to care for my mother-in-law, but now I find it suits me well. The convenience of working from anywhere with just a computer has been surprisingly fitting, and living alone again feels surprisingly comfortable. It's easy to take care of just myself. Caring for my mother-in-law wasn't a burden due to my affection for her, but waiting for Nick's uncertain return had been more stressful than I realized. I once believed Nick wouldn't have an affair. Friends had asked if I had doubts about him, but I laughed it off, thinking he wasn't the type. Now, I've painfully realized that people change. The Nick I was initially attracted to was diligent and loving, although not very successful in his job. Over time, he changed, but the shift was so gradual that I didn't notice it. I should have recognized it when he left all the responsibilities to me. The kind of Nick I once knew no longer exists. Reflecting on it now seems pointless. What I need is a break. As I stood up, trying to lift myself out of my gloomy thoughts, I decided to make some coffee and enjoy the cake I had bought yesterday. The perks of working from home, I mused. As I hurried back to my seat with a cup of coffee and a slice of cake, I savored each bite, feeling quite content, a sign that my mood had improved significantly. My feelings for Nick had completely cooled off. Just as I was pondering this, my smartphone vibrated. I glanced at the screen and saw Nick's name. I didn't want to let him ruin the uplifted mood I had finally achieved, so I chose not to answer. He had ignored my repeated calls before, so ignoring his call now felt like giving him a taste of his own medicine. An eye for an eye, I thought, justifying it to myself. Busy with work, I set my phone to silent mode and placed it a little out of reach. After enjoying my cake, I tried to focus on my tasks, but concentration eluded me. My phone kept vibrating incessantly. As soon as one call ended, another began, causing the phone to buzz repeatedly. Finally, I gave in and answered. "Hello," I began. "What do you think you're doing?" Nick interrupted loudly, cutting me off before I could greet him properly. "I'm about to be kicked out of the tower apartment. Explain this to me." I sighed. I've been wanting to talk to you about that, but you wouldn't answer my calls or reply to my emails. Blaming me is unfair. His yelling from the other end made me shake my head in exasperation. Was he always this difficult? If things continued like this, I might really have to leave. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I sold the apartment," I replied with a sigh. "Sold it." His voice, initially taken aback, seemed to calm down a bit. "Don't joke with me. That's my tower apartment. Just because we're exes doesn't mean you can do whatever you want." "Your wife is pregnant," I retorted. "Your wife?" "I admire your nerve to say that to me. You know I tried to contact you multiple times, right? Have you forgotten how you ignored all of that?" He probably thought I wasn't angry since I left him quietly, but who wouldn't be angry in such a situation? "I had tried calling and emailing you multiple times about something important. If only you had responded." "Well, I'm busy with work now, so I'll be hanging up. Goodbye." Ignoring his continued shouting, I ended the call. How self-centered could he be? My phone started vibrating again, flashing Nick's name on the screen. Unwilling to answer, I tossed the phone onto the bed and managed to get back to work. I understood why Nick was so anxious, though. Rumor had it that his mistress was a much younger and charming woman. Could such a girl really be attracted to an ordinary man? I had been viewing the situation cynically, assuming it was all about money. For the past few years, Nick hadn't contributed to our living expenses, so perhaps he was spending that money on his mistress. It made sense why he seemed affluent, living in a high-rise apartment. No wonder he appeared attractive to her, even though he wasn't particularly handsome. It turns out, right after moving in, he nearly got kicked out and no longer had the financial ease he once enjoyed. This must have been an unexpected blow for his mistress. Nick was desperate not to fall out of favor with his new wife. In reality, the apartment we lived in belonged to my mother-in-law. She bought it when we decided to move in with her after getting married. I was impressed by her bold decision. "You're newlyweds, but if you're going to live with your mother-in-law, at least I want you to live somewhere nice and convenient," she had said. I was surprised when she actually bought that apartment. Since then, Nick had pretentiously referred to it as the tower apartment. It always felt odd and even uncomfortable when he'd say, "I'm going back to my tower apartment." I remember struggling not to laugh out loud. So, hearing that he was kicked out of the tower apartment might seem funny from the outside, but it was serious for Nick. Meanwhile, my phone on the bed continued to vibrate incessantly. I wondered if Nick felt the same way when he kept receiving calls from me. The thought made me pause my typing. Was my behavior mirroring his? The idea annoyed me instantly. Why was I so irritated? Quickly, I stood up, grabbed the still vibrating phone, and answered the call. "Stop it. What do you want?" I demanded. "You sold my tower mansion," he accused. "Your tower mansion?" I retorted coldly. "That place belonged to your mother. Was it ever really yours? Now that she's gone, it's only natural for her daughter-in-law, who cared for her daily, to take over. I'm appalled that you didn't even bother to visit her in her final days and now claim to be the rightful heir. If you think she left her property to someone like you, that's a joke. That apartment was given to me by your mother. She preferred to leave it to someone who actually cared for her rather than a son who never bothered to visit." "That's not acceptable," Nick protested. "It is accepted. I don't need your permission. It was your mother's property, and she had every right to decide what to do with it. She clearly stated in her will that it should go to me." Talking to Nick was giving me a headache. Was this selfish man really the person I once loved? Why was I attracted to him in the first place? His irresponsible behavior over the past few years had deeply saddened his mother. He refused to contribute financially to the household, broke promises, and complained about my housework. She believed our relationship wouldn't last long because of how he acted. When I heard this from my mother-in-law, I assumed Nick and I would always be together. I reassured her, "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." I never imagined we'd break up so soon after that. She told me, "After you split up, you can either keep the place or sell it. Do whatever you think is best." It was even written in her will. "Stop lying. You must have made that up yourself," Nick shouted. I was frustrated with Nick's constant yelling and lack of consideration. I had tried to communicate properly, but he ignored my messages and simply sent an email asking for a divorce. So I decided to leave and sell the place. "You could have just emailed me about it," I said, tapping my itching temples. I sighed deeply. Did I really need to politely explain to a man who offloaded his parents' care to others and had an affair, via an email he might not even read, that he should reflect on his own actions? His attitude was unbearable. "You should really take a moment to reflect on your behavior," I said, trying to stay calm. "Maybe now you understand how your actions led to this. And one more thing." Before I could finish, Nick hung up, as usual, cutting me off. There was still important information I hadn't shared, but his selfishness always took over. Even though I said it was important, it wasn't really crucial to me, and I knew I shouldn't get too involved in his affairs. After all, Nick was a stranger to me now. The phone went silent, and I was finally able to focus on my work. About 6 months later, as I stood at my mother-in-law's grave, I reflected on selling the apartment. "I'm sorry for selling something you left me, but I'm truly grateful for what you did," I said softly. As I was leaving, I found myself wondering about my ex-husband and his new partner. They must have moved out after the sale of the apartment, but it wasn't my concern anymore. Feeling a bit lonely, I began my journey back home. On the way, I unexpectedly ran into a familiar face. As I suspected, he noticed me and approached, his steps heavy with anger. Behind him, a woman carried a baby. "You made us move into a rundown flat. You got money from selling the luxury apartment. Give me some of it," he demanded. "So, you're still married despite everything?" I responded with a hint of sarcasm. "It's not my fault you're living in a shabby flat. Given your income, it's only fitting you live somewhere like that." The high-rise apartment was an exception. I turned to his young wife. "You really missed out. You were drawn to his wealth, but now he's just an ordinary man," I added, unable to hold back the harsh words. I couldn't help but feel cynical. If you hand over the money, everything will be solved. But it's pitiful for Naomi and the child, don't you think? "Yes, I'm postpartum and not feeling my best," Naomi said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's just too disheartening to have to live in such a dreadful place, especially for this child." I understood her frustration, given the context. It made sense now, hearing her words from someone who might have an affair. Indeed, it must be a traumatic experience for the child to have you as a parent. "If you want to improve your living conditions," I said, "why not look for a part-time job? You need to live within your means." Their eyes widened in surprise, and they protested vehemently. They argued that a high-rise apartment lifestyle suited them, but I wasn't inclined to listen to all their excuses. From what I gathered, they seemed to overestimate their situation. Despite already living in a modest flat, they had such inflated self-esteem. "How honorable can someone who has an affair really be?" I asked, my voice unexpectedly cold and sharp. "First of all, do you even realize that today is your mother's death anniversary? And yet, here you are, making demands." When I glared at him, he retorted, his voice trembling, "But I can't help it. I don't know your address." "Stop being so shameless," I snapped. "This is pitiful. Even the worst person who had an affair might have been forgiven if they showed some compassion for the deceased." Taking a deep breath, I glanced at Naomi and the baby she was holding before turning back to Nick. "There's something important we need to discuss," I said, ready to address the issues at hand. I hadn't had the chance to fully explain before Nick cut me off during our last call. There was something important about that baby I needed to address. There's a strong possibility it might not be his child. Nick's anger flared up again. "Don't say such ridiculous things. You think you can just say whatever you want." His voice was heated, but he was clearly rattled. In contrast, Naomi's face had gone pale, showing unmistakable concern. "It's clear to anyone that we couldn't have children," I continued. "That's why I had it checked out. I wanted a child, so I saw a doctor, but they found no issues with me. I asked you multiple times to go to the hospital, but you never went. So what are you implying? That it's my fault because there's nothing wrong with me? Nick's mocking smile only deepened my frustration. Of course, there's more to the story. You had a high fever as a child, didn't you? Your mother told me that could have caused your infertility. What are you talking about? Nick demanded. The reason your mother gave me the apartment wasn't just gratitude for living there, I explained. There was a bigger reason. It was out of guilt. She felt it was her fault you couldn't have children. She apologized to me for not being able to give me grandchildren. It's not confirmed that your infertility is the cause, but maybe you should consider getting a DNA test done. Nick, who had been listening quietly, lost all his initial momentum. In a somber tone, he told Naomi, "Let's go," and started walking away. As I watched him leave, I remembered something crucial and called out, "Oh, and I'll be demanding alimony for the mental distress, just so you know." With those final words, it felt like the whole ordeal was coming to a close. Several months later, my busy schedule made me answer a call without checking the screen. "It's me. Are you doing well?" Nick's voice came through. Confused, I realized it was Nick calling. "What do you want?" "I'm busy." "Listen, that baby isn't mine." I had doubts about it myself. I realized this because of our conversation. I've divorced Naomi, so how about we start over? His attempt at reconciliation seemed utterly unrealistic. I chuckled lightly. Reconciling after an affair? That's unthinkable. I can tell you're probably struggling living alone and just want to rely on me. I might consider hiring you as my secretary. My affection for Nick had vanished completely, but he was still the only son of my mother-in-law. I thought I was being as generous as possible, but Nick wasn't pleased. "Are you mocking me? Being your secretary? This is your last chance for reconciliation." "I don't need such an opportunity," I replied. "Honestly, you should look at things more objectively." Before I could finish, the call was abruptly cut off. How childish to hang up just because he didn't like my response. Despite my good intentions, he seemed to underestimate them. He would probably continue living in a shabby flat, which was no longer my concern. After blocking all contact with Nick, I returned to my work. I had started a new business with the funds from selling the apartment, establishing a company to support my livelihood. My experience in caring for my mother-in-law and my natural business acumen paid off. The business grew rapidly, and I now had a team of staff members. It's all thanks to my kind mother-in-law. No matter how busy I get, I always make time to visit her grave on the monthly anniversary of her death to express my gratitude for the happy days she helped provide. Nick won't know, but I'll be back next month. With renewed enthusiasm, I focus on my work, determined to make the most of my new life.